end up 0.25%, Andrew.
Yeah, I should have muscled up a bit, shouldn't I, Kieran? On Sunday agenda, the crystal ball, I had it going up 0.15%. They've gone further, 0.25%. But there were certainly those in government who thought, given the inflation figure, the Reserve Bank would act. When they saw the markets were so confident that it would hold, people in government, I think, thought, oh, well, maybe it is going to hold. But there you have it. One of the reasons for my prediction was just pure logic, Kieran, I have to say. If inflation's at 7% and you previously flagged there might be further rate rises and you don't then hike then, when on earth do you hike? And so that's what we're seeing, some pain for households. Interestingly, the last rise, some of the banks, certainly in terms of owner-occupier loans, did not follow the Reserve Bank into that rise. And it was put to me at one point by Anna Bligh, head of the Banking Association, a lot of that's to do with competition within the banking sector. They felt they could absorb that. As Ross just said, very doubtful that they'll be looking to absorb this one. So this does mean more pain. And I think the most concerning thing about it, because I think most Australians would have expected one or two more hikes, is that part of the statement Ross read out signalling there could be more yet to come. That's what creates consumer fear, consumer uncertainty. A lot of people will be hoping this is the last. That statement says otherwise.
Yeah, and Ross, there was some surprise, certainly within the government, that the market was so unanimous in its view that there'd be a pause. And particularly what Andrew said there, given inflation is so stubbornly high right now, that common sense would suggest that if the RBA is going to move, why not move sooner rather than later to get the impact that they're after?
Look, I've got to say, look, from a purist point of view, you've got to welcome the Reserve Bank making this decision today. It shows that they have a bit of ticker to fight inflation. That was the worry when the pause came last month. The first central bank around the world to pause interest rates. But interestingly enough, it was that inflation number that came out last week that has really turned this decision to raise the rates by 0.25%. And the reason for it is not just goods price inflation. So in other words, the price of goods, and even Woolworths today came out and said that the price of groceries has broadly gone up by about 5.2% in the March quarter, which was down from 7.7% the previous quarter. The problem for the Reserve Bank is services price inflation. The problem is if the price of services starts to rise in your economy, it's much harder to get rid of that. And because that services inflation sitting at 6.6% is higher than anybody anticipated, that's the reason I believe that's prompted. In fact, they say it here. Now, just to give you some little indicator around the world right now, this is inflation on the left-hand side, rather the cash rate on the left-hand side, 3.85%. There's our inflation rate, 7% on the right-hand side. And so you can see, say, for example, the United States, they're about to raise their rates. They're pretty much at the inflation rate. You can see Canada's at the inflation rate. The UK, nowhere near it at the moment. Australia, way off it. And that's another reason. The theoretical argument, at least anyway, because you want your cash rate and your inflation rate to be pretty close if you're to take demand out of the economy and try and get inflation back on an even keel.
And in a way, the RBA, if it wants to shift behaviour by surprising the expectation, it is doing that to a degree. And I think this is very timely, Andrew, 1 week out from Jim Chalmers' budget, which he has said repeatedly is in the context and will be framed with the theme of restraint because of this inflationary environment we're in.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd ask me that, Kieran. I really think now this frames how important this budget is. What a big thing we're covering next Tuesday evening in terms of, does the government have the ticker to show the discipline required? Because there's no point copying rate hike after rate hike if there's policy in there which just fuels inflation further. The government is under immense political pressure to provide cost of living relief. They're showing, at least in their rhetoric, that they're going to largely put the brakes on that. And when I talk about that political pressure, some of it's from their own backbench and from their own base in terms of a lifted job seeker. We know from the stimulus packages that were put out in COVID and the GFC that if you raise something like job seeker, that's disposable income. It goes straight out the door. It fuels inflation. Today we've got the news they're only looking to do it for over 55s. There's a reason for that. Well, a couple of reasons. One is 3.5% unemployment. It's not like it's difficult to get work at the moment. It might be a different story if there was higher unemployment. The other is very simply this inflation problem. There's no point compensating various people and then just having them cop a rate hike, or if they're a renter, a rent hike caused by the rate hike. So you see why the fiscal discipline is just so important in this budget and can prevent further rate hikes, Kieran.